So as soon as I turned and started to walk away, the gentleman, I don't even know if we can call him that, but the male half of this incident decided to blindside punch me in the side of the head.
You know what, gang? This show has been on the air for over a year now, and I cannot say enough about how many times there's been a guest on this show who comes on and says, look, I got into a defensive encounter and I talked to the police, or I didn't know what to do when all the dust settled. Firearms legal protection is there so you can win the fight after the fight, and you're able to carry on with your life. It is the only defensive legal membership that Active Self-Protection recommends, and there's a reason for that. They're committed to helping you train and educate yourself, and that's why they're invested in bringing these educational and training podcasts and videos to you. Please thank them for their support and consider them for your needs. Check their plans out at get-ask.com/FLP. Get-ask.com/FLP. Well, alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am yet again your host, Mike Williver, and I am your favorite, say it with me, former Fed. With us today.
Fed.
That's right. With us today, a new friend of mine, Mason Bantz. He is in Iowa. He is a single father of one child. And as is relevant to the story, he is formerly a police officer and currently works armed security and bail enforcement on the side of that. Mason, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you?
I'm well, and I say to everyone, thank you so much for writing in, being willing to tell your story. If not for people like you, there wouldn't be a show, because no one wants to hear me talk for an hour. And furthermore, for those of you watching on the app, this is what you asked for. This is what you get. This is my big ugly face for an hour. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you are on the app, thank you so much for subscribing to that and helping us further the work that we're doing. So talk us through your history. You were a police officer in a local agency. We're not going to mention any names or towns, but for a time prior to being in law enforcement, was it always a desire of yours to do something like that, something like security or law enforcement?
Absolutely. So since the time I can remember, probably 3, 4 years old, my mom and dad and family always said, I always had a toy gun or a badge on my shirt, and was just always constantly wanting to be a police officer. Growing up, I always loved the crime shows, and one of my favorites was always Walker, Texas Ranger. Always wanted to win against the bad guys, So it was always a desire. Just like every kid, get into some trouble in your youth, and stuff like that. It teaches you some lessons, some valuable lessons. And from there, after high school, me and my two best friends, the three of us total, decided to join in the Marine Corps, and I was going to use that as a stepping stone to get to my law enforcement goal. So, unfortunately, I had to lose a little bit of weight. They shipped out, so I had to just wait until I could do that. And then once I did get to weight, I found out I had colon cancer and was medically discharged. So,
oh man,
yeah, 21 years old, colon cancer, kind of a shock to a lot of people. So, but anyway. It obviously closed that door, and decided to do it the old-fashioned way and enrolled in community college that has a specific program designed for law enforcement. The college, literally, it's called the Police Science Program, and it's basically a 2-year criminal justice degree. However, it is a lot more hands-on. They actually have a firearms course where you go in and basically all you do is ILEA qualifications. They teach you nomenclature and the proper use of firearms and stuff like that. We've done CSI classes. Anything that you're going to do as a police officer, it's almost like a mini academy, but over 2 years, and it gives you a degree while you're doing it. But then the downside of that is you have to turn around and go to the academy afterwards too. So,
yeah, so is that an Iowa thing, or is that specific to that school? I never heard of something quite like that. It sounds great.
So there's a couple different community colleges that do it in Iowa, and it's I think this particular college is kind of the start of that kind of trend. But yeah, basically it's a 2-year degree in criminal justice. It's just got a different title, and it's more tailored to the individuals that are only going into law enforcement. So they teach you constitutional classes that is going to teach you, everything you need to know about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. The right to search and seizure. And everything that you're going to be dealing with as a law enforcement officer. It is really tailored to that. And then in Iowa, if you have at least a 2-year degree, then you can go through a shortened academy. In the state of Iowa, the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, is 16, 17 weeks long. And if you have this degree or even a criminal justice degree, I do believe suffices as well. You can go through a shortened academy, which is only like 9 weeks. It's literally half the time because you have some of that experience already.
That was going to be my suggestion, that there should be a abbreviated academy if you've been through that and shown proficiency and all
Definitely.
that stuff. That's a great idea. Yeah, I think people don't realize how much law enforcement training varies across the country. It's very different in different places. Sometimes that's necessary. Some places give more training than others. I was fortunate to work around a lot of really well trained, capable law enforcement agencies in Southern California. San Diego Sheriff's being hands down my favorite agency to work with. They were fantastic.
Hmm.
And those guys do not just the academy, but, obviously you're going to qualify, go through firearms and use of force training every quarter, 4 times a year. My agency did the same thing. But they stand down for 2 weeks a year, and they call it mobile field force training, where they go out and they practice their, riot response and all that kind of stuff. And it really shows. I think there was a Trump rally in San Diego back for the 2016 election. And of course, all the attendant madness that goes with that, with all the Antifa people showing up and the opposition people showing up, and they handled that really, really well. They took care of business. Anyway, but I digress.
Oh, absolutely.
I digress. So, did you finish that 2-year course or no?
So I did not. So I was about 3 semesters in when I got the call from my department to come work them. And I'm going to give you a little backstory on that. So in the state of Iowa, I don't know how California is or even Arizona, but we do have what are called reserve officers. And that's what I was. So I was not a fully sworn officer. I was a reserve peace officer. In the state of Iowa, a reserve peace officer can do every function that a fully sworn officer can do, except for one, implied consent, which for those that don't know is just basically this document that you have to read an individual if they're suspected of an OWI, basically getting their consent to do a blood test, blood or alcohol analysis on their breath or anything like that. I could not physically read that form to them and have them sign it. And then two, I cannot physically serve a search warrant. So I can write one up, I can have it signed by a judge, and I could assist on whatever that warrant is entailed for. But I could not be the physically one to be like, here you go, Mike, you're being served a search warrant.
Okay.
Those are literally the only 2 things as a reserve officer that I could not do.
That's interesting.
I had to.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to say.
Well, we're doing this now, are we?
There we go.
We're doing this now?
Yep.
So I worked as a seasonal police officer in Ocean City, Maryland. A lot of people on the East Coast do that. It's a small town, and I'm making the numbers up, but say maybe 30,000 people live there year round. And during the summer, everyone shows up from all over Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware and Virginia to come to the beach. It's the biggest sort of beach in that area. And so the population swells from, and again, I'm making these numbers up, but they're roughly accurate, from like 30,000 to like 3 million. And all these rental properties fill up. So they bring in usually college age people are the ones that do it, although there's no restriction on the age, I don't think. And you come down, you go through an abbreviated academy, and you're out there to supplement the full-time police officers. You are sworn. Technically, you can do all the things a regular police officer can do. At least that was the case when I was there, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me. But you're not responding to, well, you're responding to pretty much everything, but you're not going to be the investigating officer on a homicide or anything crazy like that. You're mainly there for force multiplier. There's just more cops in uniform out on the boardwalk, out on the street. But for anything super serious, generally speaking, a full-time officer would handle it. But that was a great experience. And I would imagine the reserve officer program, in part, is a pipeline to becoming a fully sworn full-time officer, or people just do that and stay reserve their whole career?
So it's a little bit of both, and it's very similar to what you explained. So in the state of Iowa, there's a lot of people that do it as a way to give back to their community. I've been a volunteer firefighter almost my entire adult life. I'm almost 30 years old now, so I mean that's going on 12 years. Reserve police officer is very similar to that. The state of Iowa does not require a department to pay their reserve officers, except for $1 per year, which I think is for liability and insurance purposes. Don't quote me on that. I can't say, but it does say in our statute in Iowa that you have to be paid a minimum of $1 per year. So, and then there is a lot of officers that, like myself, when going to college, you use that as a stepping stone to get your foot in the door, start learning the job, and to go from there. And what's crazy, like you explained, is we're used as an extension of the department. Where I worked is very, very small communities. And once I got trained and I went through, we have what's called reserve modules. So it's basically a little academy tailored to a reserve officer. And where I worked, I was actually a paid reserve. And then because we were in such small communities, the largest community I worked in was 2,200 people. Again, like yourself, it was along the Mississippi River, so it doubled, with all the what we called river rats, everybody flocking to the river. It would double or triple in size and
Hmm.
population. But generally speaking, because of that, I was utilized basically as a part-time officer, and I would work 90% of the time by myself. I was the only officer on duty, and my nearest backup would be a deputy in the county, an adjacent town, which I think the closest one was 19 or 20 miles away, or a trooper if there was one in the area. So I gained a lot of valuable experience by doing that, and then eventually my work ethic showed and stuff like that. So I ended up having three other departments hire me on as a reserve, and between the four, I was working full time hours.
Wow. Okay. So were you can I ask, were you getting paid $1 a year, or were you getting paid actual money by at least one of these
No,
places?
so I was fortunate enough to where we were at because they utilized the reserves as basically part-time officers. I was getting paid a decent wage. It's obviously it would be hard to live off of now, 6, 7 years later, but I also wasn't making as much as a full-time officer either. But I was getting compensated for my time and my efforts, especially since I was being utilized basically as a part-time officer.
Very good. So there's two incidents here. I'm going to try to cram two into this one episode, and these shows can
Hmm.
be as long or shorter as they need to be to tell the story. That's one of the things I love about ASP and the leadership team here is they don't put a lot of restrictions on me. It doesn't need to be a certain length of time, so we can explore this and take as long as we need. So you have two incidents that are both roughly similar, eerily similar in the circumstances of where you were and who you were with and
Hmm.
what you were doing. So let's
Yeah.
walk through those one at a time. The first one, I did read your email, and you gave me a lot of info, which is fine. So I know more about this than normally I would. But the first incident happened at a movie theater. So kind of talk to us who you were with, what movie you were seeing, what the rating of the movie was. No, I'm kidding. Um, talk us through what happened. The movie ends, and then what?
So I'll start out by saying it was I don't remember the year specifically, but it was when Super Troopers came out. Of course, going to school to be a cop, love of law enforcement, got to go see Super Troopers.
You
It
are
was the second
freaking out,
movie.
man. Cops love that movie.
So, oh, definitely, definitely. So with me and a buddy who we went to college together in that police science program, we decided to go to the local movie theater in the town that the college was in.
Hmm.
At that time, I was a reserve officer, and not being a fully sworn officer, I'm not obligated to assert myself into any situations. Like a full time officer, you're basically on the job
Hmm.
all the time, whether you want to be or not. It's just kind of what you sign up for. As a reserve officer, the only time I'm basically protected under the rights that I have as an officer are when I'm doing the job. Um, so I was completely out of my jurisdiction, just hanging out with a buddy. Went to a movie. Uh, we decided, the movie's over. We're just going to come outside the movie theater,
Hmm.
have a good conversation, just sitting there shooting shooting the birds. We'll put it that way. I was
Sure.
going to use a different word, but let's
Sure.
not
No, I
let's
got
not
you.
use explicitives. So, um, anyway, we're just sitting there talking and hear a commotion kind of coming from over along the side of the movie theater. So, uh, me being nosy and kind of who I am, I decided to check it out, see what the heck's going on. You never know. So I start walking over there and I see a male and a female arguing. Um, I'm one of those people. I don't believe in uh, being abusive to women, either verbally or physically. And then just kind of my background stuff like that. I was not having it.
Right.
So I made the conscious decision to step in. And I went up there and I had a conversation with the aggressor, which was the male half, and we sat there and talked for a little bit. And he was very, very heated, verbally aggressive towards me, towards the woman. The worst thing I saw with him is he was kind of shoving and pushing her around a little bit,
Hmm.
but like didn't see any weapons or anything that really made me like super, super concerned. But at the same time, I just felt it wasn't right and he needed to stop. So made that conversation with him and got him to calm down a little bit. And I thought that I did a pretty good job. And I never once announced myself as a police officer. I'm not in my jurisdiction.
Okay.
It's not really my place to do that. I was just a upstanding citizen, concerned for her well being, and I didn't like how he was treating her, so I just told them to stop it, and then turned around and started to walk away.
So you walk away from this guy. Do you feel like he had cooled down? Is that why you decided to walk away from this situation?
I felt that, but he did not feel that.
Ah.
So as soon as I turned and started to walk away, the gentleman I don't even know if we can call him that, but the male half of this
Right.
incident,
That guy.
uh, yep, we'll go with that. That guy decided to blindside punch me in the side of the head. So um, I ended up getting knocked to the ground because of it. And from there, I had to kind of basically make a decision on what I was going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I got up. We didn't go into the backstory of kind of my life, like some of the other guests we do, because we talked a little bit about my law enforcement, but I'm also a second degree black belt in Taekwondo. So
Okay.
I have quite a bit of martial arts training and things of that nature. Thank you, Chuck Norris and Walker Texas Ranger.
He doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down underneath him. Chuck Norris jokes are some of my favorites. And real quick, some folks now watching will be like, why is he looking away and typing? I like to keep notes so I don't forget stuff at the end when we go over lessons. So I'm not being rude. I am listening. That's what I'm doing there. So moving on. So you start to walk away. And
you're good.
What does this guy decide to do as a result?
So he decides to punch me in the side of the head and blindside me. At that point, my back is turned to him. Yep. My back was turned to him. I was completely oblivious to what was going to happen next. And at that point, he decided to strike me in the side of the head and knock me to the ground. Obviously, being the type of person I am, I'm not going to take that. So I got up and I returned a strike back to him. And my one strike landed just right that I was able to basically knock him out.
So what sort of strike are we talking about?
So I did the old fashioned roundhouse kick. Taekwondo is it's a lot of kicking, a lot of fancy kicking. It looks cool on TV and stuff like that. It's not necessarily the most practical in real life, in real life fighting. But I just had an open opportunity. I just kind of let my instincts kick in. I kick a lot of bags and do a lot of sparring, so I felt comfortable in that maneuver, and I ended up landing a roundhouse kick right to his jaw here. So, one kick knocked him out, and then the ensuing chaos is kind of one of the reasons I wrote in. I definitely learned a lesson from that day for sure. So
I think, and I'll jump ahead to one of the lessons here. You have to talk about it is, do you get involved in a third party encounter? And that is one of those things that only you can decide for yourself under the circumstances, but it helps.
Absolutely.
It helps to have thought through this sort of thing before it actually happens. Had you given thought previously to, okay, if I'm out and about and I'm not on duty and I'm not considered a police officer and I come across something, am I going to get involved or not? Or was it very case specific to this incident for you?
So for me, it's a little difficult. I always consider myself a protector of people. I'm constantly running through my head scenarios. I conceal carry every day. I have other tools on me that I feel is part of my, not even just a firearm, just things that I carry every day that is part of my life and who I am. And it's going to better prepare me for hopefully any situation I run into. So I'm constantly talking to myself and preparing myself with mental repetitions, just making sure that, if anything were to arise, that hopefully I've had that scenario in my head that I can jump to action and protect myself or others around, whether I know them or not. Just the type of person I am. I never thought of it in the way of, being a law enforcement officer off duty in a place that I'm not in a jurisdiction. I never thought of it that way. I literally just thought of it as, I'm an upstanding citizen of this community. Whether I'm living there or not, it's the community I'm in presently, and I need to do what I can to protect those citizens around me. And consequences be damned. That's how I looked at it, and that's just kind of my mindset because I want to help everybody.
Sure.
And so I didn't really think of the consequences. I just thought of, what can I do to help this person to make sure that this woman especially isn't getting abused or hurt in public. It's bad enough when someone does behind closed doors, in my opinion, like a coward. But then when you do it in public like that, that's just a whole nother level of disrespect.
So the police came and immediately hailed you as a hero and gave you the key to the city.
Absolutely not.
Oh,
absolutely not.
So what did happen?
So, due to the situation, a lot of people had already called 911. So unbeknownst to me, the law enforcement was already en route. At that point, nothing was physical other than him grabbing her and screaming and yelling at her. And then all of a sudden, here comes this big burly guy. I'm not a small guy. I'm a little bit on the heftier side. So all of a sudden here comes this big burly guy, all of a sudden these two gentlemen are having a heated conversation, so I'm sure some people were definitely concerned at that point. It was literally seconds after he hit the ground that law enforcement showed up. And it was at that point, here I am standing over a gentleman who is now unconscious on the ground. And the first thing, even me as a law enforcement officer, and I think you as a law enforcement officer, you roll up to a scene like that and you see that, you're going to go to the person that appears to be the aggressor. And at that point, it was me.
Mhm.
So I got placed into handcuffs immediately.
In that moment, they put you in cuffs. I'm sure because you're in the business, you weren't freaking out as maybe a non-cop might be like, holy crap, and protesting vehemently because, this is just what they have to do. Is that what you were thinking, or were you a little freaked out of it in that
Yeah,
moment?
a little bit of both.
Right.
A little bit of both. So I didn't immediately start babbling. Obviously with some of my training, obviously I know that anything I do say, whether they read me Miranda or not, whether I'm under arrest or not, can be used against me in the court of law.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't start babbling and screaming, I did this, I did that, or I didn't do this, didn't do that. I just kind of stayed silent, just complied with their commands. I did inform the officer, just so you know, I do have a firearm on me.
Mm-hmm.
He went and secured that and then had me sit on the push bumper of the squad car. And then I just kept my mouth shut until an officer came to start talking with me.
So this officer comes over to you, uniformed police officer, and
Mm-hmm.
does he Mirandize you first? Does he start asking questions first, or what? Walk us through that. What was that like?
So the first thing that happened is they put me in handcuffs. I told them about the firearm. They cleared my firearm. They sent me on the push bumper of the patrol vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had an officer sit with me. And then basically they went and rendered aid to the other male individual. Of course, once he woke up, that man assaulted me. This and that,
Right.
the whole charade of went through there. So from there, we sat down. They came over, and because of his statements, they did Mirandize me at that point.
Okay. So they Mirandize you. I assume they're talking to other people, witnesses, maybe the
Mm-hmm.
female half of the domestic, and they weed through all that. Then they come talk to you. They Mirandize you, and what is their initial questioning like? What are they asking you?
So at first they obviously the read Miranda, and then they go through and ask me questions of, one, what was my purpose there, things of that nature. Why did I strike him the way that I did? Why couldn't I just have punched him? Why did I have to go and kick him? And I just explained to him, based off my self defense and the situation at hand, that's the strike that I felt most comfortable with. And then, they asked me, why I struck him. And I just went into the detail, and I kept it very short, very brief. I wasn't trying to give too much information. All I basically said was, I intervened in what appeared to be a domestic situation between a male and a female. I thought the situation was, calmed down. The male seemed a little bit calm. I turned around to walk away, and that's when he hit me blindsided, and I just retaliated in self defense. Luckily, at that point, other officers had finished their conversations with other people, and shortly thereafter, they actually came in and did the cuffs on my hands. So um, it's a little weird, I understand the Mirandization because at that point I seemed like the aggressor, and they wanted to ask questions, and obviously we all know that if they don't Mirandize me, those questions may not hold up in court, especially when it comes to an assault or a potential crime like that. So,
Right.
but at the same time, it was a little odd that they Mirandized me, and literally a few minutes later, then they released me. So,
Well, I mean, fortunately for you, as you indicate in your email, everyone kind of had the same story, including the female
mhm.
half. Is that correct? The female half of the domestic was
Oh,
also.
absolutely, absolutely, which was shocking to me, dealing with a few domestics myself on the job. Uh, we read stories all the time on how an abused female, or even men, we always talk about the female, right? But even men, there's some men out there that are in a bad relationship like that are just in the same position that a female is. We just always say it's the female, right?
Right.
And we oftentimes see, and I think you can say this, even more than I am with the many years of your experiences. Very oftentimes, those abused halves will oftentimes go back to their abuser, or basically tell or agree with their side of the story,
Yeah.
to try and not get them in trouble.
And or turn on the officer who's there to help them. That happens probably half the
Exactly.
time, where all of a sudden, and I say this all the time, I beat this horse silly, but you can fully expect, if you arrive at a domestic violence scene, wherever it is, in public or at someone's house or apartment, the minute you come through the door, there's this, I don't understand the syndrome, but it's like being held hostage, where you start to sympathize with your hostage takers, Stockholm syndrome, but it's something else. And frequently You'll be now fighting both the male and female half, or the male or female, whatever it might be. You're now fighting with both of them because
Yep.
you've interjected yourself into this very emotional, very high stress environment, and they don't want you there. I think in part, this is my theory anyway, is that it's frequently the case that it used to be the case a lot where they would show up and they would be like, oh, it's mutual combat, we can't arrest anybody, and then the police leave. So if you're the female half or the victim half, whatever that might be, and the police come and don't arrest anyone, and you're there telling them, yeah, he hit me, then you're going to get it worse when the police leave, potentially. So that's probably
Hmm.
something to do with it. So, did this guy end up getting arrested by them or no?
So yes, eventually, once all the stories came out, obviously my buddy was there. He did not get involved. He was not a law enforcement officer, and he didn't feel comfortable. And not me being a law enforcement officer made me feel more comfortable than him. I just did. I felt comfortable in that situation. I put myself in that situation. But he told my side of the story. There was other bystanders. This was 5 6 years ago. There's people that recorded it. And then the female, she did. She actually came and said, no, my boyfriend was being aggressive with me. This gentleman came in to basically stop my boyfriend. Just told him to, that just be nice, and then he did what he did. So, and
Well,
then
that's good news.
shortly thereafter, absolutely for me and for her. But then shortly thereafter, they placed him into cuffs, and he was arrested not only for assaulting me, but also for the domestic assault on her. So,
Very good. We already talked about one of the two lessons I wanted to take out of this, which was, do you get involved or not? And that's something you have to hopefully have thought through ahead of time. And it really is a case dependent thing. It could be that it's just you and the male half is, clearly twice your size and capable of, and you're not armed. There's no other, OC, there's nothing you can do but call the police and hope for the best. I would say, and I didn't ask you this, but once you break contact with someone like that, I'm a big fan of backing up a few feet, getting away from them a little bit before you turn your back, because you just don't know. Although, I mean, you felt like this guy had calmed down, so no harm, no foul. But for someone listening, there's your mental rep. Get a little space before you turn your
oh,
back on them.
absolutely, I can definitely second that. It was definitely a big lesson I took away from that. Um, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I believe that everybody is kind at heart. Obviously doing the job, I see otherwise. But at the same time, I still have that internal belief that people are good, inherent belief that people are good, and it can be detrimental. And I learned my lesson that day, not to turn my back on someone, especially someone that was aggressive towards me.
Right. I just got a text from John. Oh, it's a meme. Of course it's a meme. Oh, John Correa, you and your memes. So I want to move on to the second story. Believe it or not, folks, he was at another movie with the same friend.
Yep, same
Same
friend.
friend, and how far after the first incident was the second one?
So this was a couple years afterwards. I'm no longer a law enforcement officer at this point.
Okay.
I'm just a normal law-abiding, Second Amendment loving citizen. So
So what movie were you seeing this time? Was it Super Troopers 3?
honest, right? Is there even a Super Troopers 3?
I don't think so. No,
I don't think so. But honestly, I don't even remember on this one.
that's
This
okay.
one is, I think this situation, which we'll get into, is a lot higher stress to where I think some of the events of that day have still not returned to my memory.
Hmm.
So, probably the little things like the movie. I remember I went to a movie, right? But I don't remember the movie we were watching.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so ironically, going to another movie with the same friend, in a different town. This one was much smaller. We were just passing through. This is actually on the complete opposite side of the state, in a town that he lived. It was like on his spring break or something like that. And I went over and we were just visiting.
Okay.
So we went to this movie. I conceal carry almost, I'd say 98% of the time, unless I'm working my armed security job, my bail enforcement, or back then law enforcement officer. I'm almost always concealed carrying. When I first started carrying, kind of a little bit of backstory, I thought it was cool to open carry. I think a lot of people do. In the state of Iowa, you can open carry, and now we have constitutional
A lot
carry.
of folks go through that phase, yeah.
Yeah. So I open carried it first. Obviously you get them weird stares. Everybody's like, "Oh, most people are oblivious. They're on their phone." A lot of people are a little more cognizant than what other people give them credit for.
Sure.
So, I kind of got tired of the stairs, and then when I did get into law enforcement and got those stairs daily, not only because I'm carrying a firearm, but because of the uniform in general,
Hmm.
I just decided, I get them stairs constantly at work. I don't need to have that type of, uh, you know, almost like laser beam pointed at me every day of my life.
Sure.
So I decided to start concealed carrying. I started at the 334 o'clock position because I'm a bigger guy. And then within the last couple of years, I've actually moved into the appendix position, which I love all the advantages of it. Um, for some people, you can do it. Some people you can't.
Yeah, I
Being a bigger
can't.
guy, everybody's like bigger. Yeah, exactly. And everybody's like bigger people. You can't do it. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm 5'8", 270. I got a belly on me, and for me, it all comes down to holster and belt combination. If you have a good holster and a good carry belt that can support that holster, then you can make anything work. And that's not just for the appendix carry, but I digress from that.
Right.
But yeah. So anyway, I kind of got on that tangent there, but I conceal carry. My buddy, he was kind of at that phase of his life. He was doing a lot of open carry. Um, so being in a movie theater and stuff like that, we felt it was probably in the best interest that he didn't carry in the movie theater. So he left his firearm in the vehicle. After the movie, we were on the way back to his house, and we stopped at a gas station to relieve ourselves and get some refreshments and things like that.
Hmm.
And that's when that day took a crazy turn. So, and then I can just hop into the story from here.
Yeah.
So we were actually in the back of the store, by the coolers, getting some refreshments. Sorry, my dog's barking because my buddy's
That's okay.
out working on my car.
In the age of work from home and Zoom calls, everyone forgives you for having your dog barking or your baby crying in the background. It's fine.
Right. Luckily, he's at daycare today, so we don't have to worry about that one.
Right.
But so we're back in our refreshments, and lo and behold, another domestic breaks out where I'm at. And if you talk to anybody that knows me, whether I was a police officer, bail enforcement, security now, you talk to anybody that knows me, I'm gonna be a little explicit here, but they always call me a magnet.
Mm-hmm.
It sticks to me. Bad things just kind of happen around me, and I don't know. Some of I'm very observant,
It's
and
a
I
very,
just
very
see
real
things.
thing. I can confirm. Ask me how I know that that's a real thing.
But anyway, so jump ahead. Needless to say, me and my friend haven't gone to a movie together since because of all this.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
We'll stay at home and we'll like voodoo a movie now or something like that.
Right.
So, but anyway,
and then someone breaks in your house as the credits are rolling.
Right.
Watching a movie at home.
I feel like that'd even be a worse idea.
Probably not.
But anyway, so we're getting our refreshments at the cooler, and all of a sudden we hear this female scream, and it was not just a like a little kid screaming. I mean, it was a blood curdling, like fear for my life scream. So I take off, run to the front of the store, and there's people kind of running out of the store. So I know something crazy is going on.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to look over, and here's this guy physically restraining this female, and he's got a knife to her stomach, and she's extremely pregnant, and you can just see the fear on her face. And he's like, being a cop, I've been in some critical incidents, stuff like that, and like you could tell she was scared for her life.
Okay, so he's got a knife to her pregnant stomach at this point. About how far away are you when this all clicks and you realize what's happening?
I mean, I circled around from the cooler to around the counter area. I'd say I was probably within 10 yards. So 10, 15, 10, 10, 12 yards, something like that. So, I mean, close enough that I could, I could do something if I needed to, but at the same time, I'm not going to get too close with a knife. That's a huge threat.
Right.
But anyway, so I, being a concealed carry holder, and then even though I'm not a cop anymore, I kind of reverted back to my cop training. Jumping ahead, I talked to an officer later on after the incident. Surprise alert! I didn't shoot the person, but the officer straight up asked me, he's like, "Why didn't you shoot the individual?" And I said, "Probably because of my training." And where I'm going with this is, I drew my firearm and I instantly started giving him commands.
Mm-hmm.
Very loud, stern voice. Drop the knife, put the knife down, stuff like that. And he definitely was not expecting it. And I broke his OODA loop to the point where he froze for a second, and it actually allowed her to get away.
Okay.
She took off running and ran out of the front door of the establishment. So,
So in
uh,
the moment when you drew the gun initially, is he in this traditional hostage stance where he's standing behind her and you only have a small target, or is he next to her? What's his orientation to the potential victim?
so he's actually like facing her, because with one hand he's like got a hold of her arm, like her forearm, because she was trying to pull away,
Hmm.
and he had a hold of her forearm and he was like pulling her to him. And it was at that point when she was resisting and just wouldn't listen to him that he pulled the knife and put it up to her belly and said, "You need to stop, or I'm gonna kill you and the baby." And he I could literally hear him say that.
Okay.
Um, so I think it was very shortly after that is when I decided to draw and present my firearm on him.
Can I ask what you were
So
carrying that day?
So this is before I transitioned to the red dots. I think it was a Gen One Smith and Wesson Shield.
Okay.
That was like one of my first concealed carry guns. To this day, I love the Shield. I have since moved on to a little bit bigger, but not quite bigger, but better things. Um, so now, for the most part, I either carry a 43X with a red dot and flashlight, or I carry a Hellcat Pro. I just like that new micro gun that everybody's going to. It's got the kind of the full size grip, but it's slim and narrow and super easy to conceal.
And this episode will be brought to you by HK USA, because I just can't let you name all those other guns and not mention HK, the far superior.
Right, right.
We had someone write an email in asking us to quit being snobs about HKs, and I'm like, well, they give us free guns. I'm going to say nice things about them. They don't have to be the best
Right.
firearm in the world. They just are, in my opinion, the finest pistols you can get. Anyway, I digress again. We're digressing a lot here. So she runs out of the store. What happens next?
So at that point, he starts fronting on me. He doesn't come at me, but he's basically making gestures and saying things like, like my life's over, stuff like that. Like, just kill me, just end it now, And I'm like, no, 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 like, stay where you are. Like, I don't want to shoot you, but I will if I have to. Like, we can work through this. And during that time, my buddy actually ran out to check on her, and the clerk was actually, I don't want to say the word coward, because that's not what he was doing. He was in life preservation mode. He was scared,
Mhm.
but he was hunkered down behind the counter. And I literally yelled at him. I said, "Call 911." Which granted, I'm sure a lot of other people already did, but I said, "Call 911." So he did. And as I'm sitting there talking with this guy, my buddy actually retrieved his firearm out of the car and tried to come back in. And I yelled at him. I was like, "Stay outside." I was like, "We don't need two people in here aggravating this individual even more." I said, "You call 911, and this guy's super trained on me, so he's not even paying attention to what I'm saying." But I tell my buddy, I was like, "Call 911 and literally tell them, the guy with the gun is the good guy.
Right.
Don't shoot the guy with the gun." Some of that is from some of the trainings I've been at, as a cop. And then obviously this is before active self protection was kind of I think maybe the videos were kind of starting to take off at this time. I don't remember what year you guys founded, um, but either way, you guys talk about that a lot. If you could potentially, say something like that or give that kind of information, it'd probably be wise to do so. And I
Yep.
did. And anyway, so he went back outside. He called cops and informed them. And I just basically held my gun trained on him the entire time and just talked to him, had a conversation with him, tried to get him to drop the knife. He wouldn't. It didn't take very long for law enforcement to show up. And when they did, it was only like two officers. I was kind of shocked. I was like, this is kind of a serious situation. I'm surprised there's not more officers. But smaller communities, kind of like what I worked in, where I was the only officer on duty, to where my backup might have been a deputy, like I said, miles away,
Right.
or they'd have to call in another full-time officer. So I understood it. So the officer came in, he started talking to the individual, and at that point he said, "Sir, I need you to go outside." So I retreated outside and met up with my friend. Slowly, one by one, more officers started arriving, and they talked to that individual. I mean, it seemed like forever, but I think it only lasted 20, 30 minutes maybe, which is a long time. But when you think about standoffs and stuff like that, you hear about hours and hours long standoffs,
Days
right?
sometimes, yeah.
Exactly. So, to my surprise, they got him somewhat calm and receptive to the one officer, but he wouldn't put the knife down. They ended up sneaking an officer in behind him and actually ended up tasing him, and that's how they ended up getting him into
A
custody.
little Zeus juice, huh? Took him down.
Yep, yep, exactly. And if anybody's never been tased, it's the worst 5 seconds of your life, and I think Mike can attest to that. It's
Yeah,
not fun.
I actually never was trained with a taser. We never, our agency, it was a federal agency. I think they just got
Hmm.
tasers as I was leaving. They're a little slow to adopt new stuff. In
Yeah.
fact, we moved from gun and fists and that's it to adding
Hmm.
pepper spray and batons in 1997 or 8. That's how slow we were to
Oh
pick up on
wow.
stuff. Yeah. But never trained. I did have a friend of mine who was a trainer, just for gigs. You know, one night we're bored as we're doing a gang op, but there's just nothing going on, and it's so
Hmm.
slow and it's late. And he had the one where you just clip it, you clip them on rather than actually
Oh,
deploying a taser.
the gator clips.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
sucked. It sucked, and apparently that doesn't suck as much as actually getting tased. So I can't imagine what that feels like. But I'm good. I feel like
Yeah.
I've been pepper sprayed. I was an instructor for our agency for pepper spray years ago, and I got pepper sprayed like 9 different times
Oh my
for
goodness.
training. And yeah, plus you know, as you know, you catch some in the field. A little
Oh,
wind goes the
don't even
wrong way,
talk
and
to me
you
about that. I have a partner in bail enforcement. Every time he pulls that thing out, you better close your eyes because you're going to get it.
yeah,
I
yeah, it's
think
not fun.
I've been exposed one time for training for my because in Iowa you have to take an exposure to be in order to carry it as a law enforcement officer,
Hmm.
and then I've probably been exposed another at least 6 times just in the field from other officers from overspray, or in the case of my buddy who's actually a part owner of the company I was telling you about. Um, this last time we were fighting with a fugitive, and yeah, it got everywhere. We all got it, and afterwards he's like, "I'm not carrying this stuff anymore." Needless to say, it's still on his belt. So
Yeah, it has its place. It's like anything else. Like there's times when you know you're looking at a bad guy who's not complying. You got to get him into custody, and you have to use force. But if
Mhm.
he's wearing a t-shirt, a button down, and a baggy hoodie over top of that, taser's probably not going to do anything. It's not going to
Oh,
get
absolutely
a
not.
connection. So maybe pepper spray is appropriate, but like anything else, it has its time and place. And sometimes it's just too windy. It's not going to. You're more likely to affect your partner than the bad guy with it. So
Oh, absolutely.
discretion is the better part of valor. So you get this guy into custody. At no point, I assume at no point during this interaction with the police did you feel like they were questioning you or they thought anything you did anything inappropriate.
No, absolutely not. So afterwards, they had an investigator with the actual state. So in a lot of these smaller towns and stuff like that, they'll handle crimes and investigate themselves. Even me as a reserve officer, as long as it wasn't something like crazy, crazy, like as long as it wasn't like murder or
Hmm.
like suicide or something like that. Like even I, as a reserve officer, would investigate like my own potential crimes. Um, but something like super serious or something like that, they would call in the state investigative team. And since this was basically an attempted murder charge, and being a small agency, they ended up bringing in a state investigator to assist with this situation. So I talked to officers on scene there for a little bit, and then I got a call like a day or two later from that actual investigator. We sat down and discussed a couple things. So,
Yeah, I think if anything, the lessons out of this are pretty straightforward. You have to have had that conversation, especially if you're carrying a firearm.
mhm.
That conversation with yourself: what am I going to get involved? What am I not? Um, and we don't. I don't have a lot of hard and fast rules in life, and certainly I don't have one regarding this. You have to know your capabilities, your firearms training, whether you feel completely confident with your gun and with your marksmanship, whether or not the people are moving around a lot or you have a good shot or whatever. But for me, and just speaking for me personally, and I'm sure you feel the same way, I can't imagine not getting involved in that. I can't imagine being armed, being in the right place, and seeing a woman and her baby being threatened with a knife and going, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." You know what I mean? I feel like most
Oh,
people would
absolutely.
have to insert themselves into that, but it pays for you to have some training. If you're the kind of guy or gal that buys whatever gun they told you to buy at the gun store and puts it in an Uncle Mike's sausage sack and doesn't train, doesn't go to the range, doesn't do any kind of training, any force on force or whatever, and you're just sort of milling about with a gun you don't know anything about because you've never fired it, you know, you could make that situation worse potentially. You know, if you decide to insert yourself
Oh,
and you don't know what you're doing and you haven't had that conversation with yourself, absolutely that gun can get taken from you. You can end up shooting the victim, shooting the
mhm.
unborn child or whatever. So when I say I can't imagine not getting involved, I'm talking about people who have taken their self-defense training seriously and done everything they can do to prepare themselves for that possibility. So yes, want to add that word of caution. Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to ask about either one of these. It had to be hard to see a woman being held at knife point, especially a pregnant woman. Any kind of PTS from that for you, or any dreams, any nightmares, any hyper vigilance or
Not
anything?
not particularly. I I the stupid thing is I wish I could reach out to her. This is years past, and I never did get her name.
Hmm.
I did find out by the investigator that they did charge him with attempted murder times two, not only for her but for the unborn child. And he actually did tell me the whole reason this even started is another domestic situation. She was tired of getting abused, that she was trying to leave.
Mm,
She left the house. He ended up followed her to this gas station, was trying to basically kidnap her and force her back into the car to do
right.
God only knows what. And she was refusing. And that's kind of how this whole situation even transpired. Um, I wish I could reach out to her and check on her and see how the little one's doing, and stuff like that. Um, I wouldn't say it's PTSD, but that's something that does kind of affect me a little bit. Is I wish I could I wish I knew how they were doing, particularly
Right.
as far as on myself. No. Um, Again, being law enforcement, I've been in a couple critical incidents. I've never had to discharge my firearm. I've come close a couple times. And then obviously doing armed security now, and then especially bail enforcement. For those people that don't know, the slang term or the unethical term is bounty hunter.
Hmm.
I work for a bail bondsman, and we go after fugitives that don't show up to court. You know, they have a arrest warrant for them. So like I've been in fights and other things that generally most people don't get involved in more than a couple times in their life.
Right.
And just like yourself being in law enforcement, I'm sure you've been in your fair share of fights or critical incidences. And um, I'm sure eventually someday those will probably weigh on me. I think I'm young enough now, and with my son and my family, I have enough good in my life, and I know that I did the right thing that day. That I think that kind of overweighs some of those other feelings that I get. Um, Sometimes I do feel a little sad that I couldn't have helped more, but the ultimate feeling of like PTS, or like, do I have stress from it? I don't think so. Um,
Yeah. So there's
nah, I
two
don't think
there's
so.
there's two things I wanted to touch on that you just mentioned that I think are important. One is, um, if you're in law enforcement or paramedic or military or any kind of career and you're seeing awful stuff all the time, I cannot recommend enough having a good spiritual life and a good family life to the extent that you can. I didn't spend a lot of time hanging out with my fellow agents or officers or deputies off duty. I did. I socialized sometimes, but I think it's critical for anyone in a job like that to have friends who we call them normies, have friends who are just do regular jobs, who are accountants or movie theater managers or whatever, and have a good spiritual life. Have a good, for us, it's church. And most of my friends are people from church, so that I'm not constantly in that world. I get a break from all the muck and the awfulness and the stress, and I get to talk to regular people. And the second part of that is um, being in law enforcement or being in fire EMS or certain jobs in the military or like an ER nurse. These are jobs that you see things routinely every day. That if somebody else witnessed them, it would be a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. It would be the most shocking thing they'd ever seen. So don't forget you don't want to get too used to it. You don't want to, because that stuff builds up over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, every cop, every paramedic I know, every fireman I know has a little vault in the back of their brain where they put all this stuff, all the abused children and the twisted bodies from car accidents and
Hmm.
all of it, and they put it away. It's important to unpack that at some point. I'm not saying you can deal with everything all at once or just as it happens. Sometimes it takes time to process stuff, but a good therapist, or at very least, a good friend who's been there, someone else who's been in your situation, or a member of the clergy or whatever, just someone to get it out, extricate it from you. Because if it just stays in that vault forever and ever, it's going to come up one way or another, and it's going to come up in a way you don't want it to,
Oh, absolutely.
in an unpleasant way. Was there anything that you wanted to touch on that I forgot? I don't want to miss anything, sir.
So just kind of going to your last point there, if you're ever in a situation like this, or people like you and I that are in or were in job professions that can potentially cause these stressors. I explained, I did the law enforcement for 2.5 years. Been a volunteer firefighter most of my adult life. I drove an ambulance for a while. We see and do some crazy things that everybody watches on TV and thinks, oh, that would be cool. That's
Hmm.
awesome. But when you see it and do it in real life, like you realize how horrible and how awful some of these things are. When you see a mangled, like you said, mangled body on the side of the road from a nasty car accident or motorcycle accident, like that changes you. And, or some of these other things you see, walking up to a scene, and like, we won't get into detail about that, but it changes you. So you need to find that release.
Hmm.
One thing that helps me is, like you said, I have good friends. I have great family. I know we fly our flag high at active self protection.
Yes.
Um, I am faithful. I will say, doing the job and doing these other jobs that I do now, I don't see nearly as much as I used to. I don't fight people as much as I used to, but at the same time, I told you earlier, I bleed my heart on my shoulder. Um, and I try to think that all people are good, but I see so much bad that I know it's not. And because of that, I do struggle with my faith. So really put some effort into that. It's kind of, whether it be family, whether it be faith. And I'm kind of rambling now, but
That's okay.
you really need to find something that you can really hold on to and believe in. And I lost my mom a couple years ago, and it makes you question, like, is there a God? Is there a true higher being that is nothing but good? Because we do see so much evil. Um, so just know that it's okay to talk to people. Reach out if you need the help, whether it's clergy like you explained or a good friend. I've done both, and I'm very fortunate that one of my best friends is a pastor. And I've been able to do that. And if you're ever in a situation like this, or even worse, you have to discharge a firearm, or you have to protect your life in the worst way. Just know talking to someone will help. It's going to be painful, it's going to hurt, but telling that story, like you said, it's going to relieve some of that pressure and some of that baggage, and ultimately, it's going to make you feel healthier in the long run.
Mason Bantz, thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you, Mike. I appreciate your time.
Well, alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski. He and I were talking before we hit the record button, and he referred to the Gutowski Files as a palate cleanser after the main interview. I prefer to think of it as dessert. It is a little extra goodness at the end of the meal that is the main interview. And I'm going to go off topic here if I don't stop immediately. Stephen, how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. I mean, it's certainly after listening to potentially harrowing self-defense stories, you're just getting some gun news here. It's a little bit less stressful, perhaps at times.
Lower the blood pressure after the main interview is over, perhaps.
Although I guess it depends on the story.
That's true. That's true. Well, this week's story may not lower your blood pressure. We'll see. We're talking about Illinois and an article over at thereload.com. By the way, Stephen is the founder of thereload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast, which you can be found on all of your podcast networks, as well as on the Reload YouTube channel. Who was on this week, Stephen?
This week we had Alan Beck.
Okay.
See, I forgot for a split second, then immediately remembered right before it would have been awkward to have a pause. So that was pretty impressive, I think. The brain is working well today. Alan Beck is a independent gun rights lawyer. Doesn't work for any of the major gun rights groups, but he files cases oftentimes in Hawaii.
Okay.
Which makes sense because Hawaii has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. And last week he had two major victories, one against the butterfly knife ban that they had in Hawaii, and one against these sensitive places restrictions, this sort of Bruin response laws we've talked a lot about on the show. And so we had him on to discuss his big week. He's also filing a whole new suit against another Hawaii jurisdiction where they try to make you waive your attorney-client privilege, your privilege between you and your priest, even when you go to apply for your concealed carry license.
That's not a thing. Sorry. No, I can't. Hey, as a federal agent listening to known bad guys on wiretaps, if you call your priest your lawyer, I have to disconnect immediately. I can't listen to any of that. So
well, you didn't find the magic loophole, I guess, that this sheriff in Hawaii has, where you can just violate all your privacy rights.
Recent events got and prayers out to everyone in Maui and Lahaina. That was just terrible, and it's still unfolding. We're recording this on Monday. Just heartbreaking stuff. But Hawaii's the local government there is just so rabidly anti-gun. We have a friend of the channel and fellow employee Soleil Roche who lives out there, and she actually got her concealed weapons permit. Chief of the Honolulu Police Department gave her the okay. Oh, hit my mic. Gave her the okay and the go ahead. So, which means that she can now walk directly out the front path of her house and spin around in a circle on the sidewalk, and that's where she can carry it. Or that's what they would like to have happen. At any rate,
and that's what one of the cases was about that he just won. So people should check out that interview if they want to hear.
Please do over at the. There's always a link, by the way, in the description on the audio version over to the Reload. So check that out and consider getting a membership. It's well worth it. We are not talking about Illinois this week, or excuse me, about Hawaii. We're talking about Illinois, and the headline over at the Reload by Stephen Gutowski: Illinois Supreme Court reverses ban against assault weapons. Reverses ruling against assault weapons ban. I can talk. And this is actually really interesting because it has a lot more to do kind of with the angle that the plaintiffs took rather than the Second Amendment. So kind of tell us what's going on over there, Stephen.
Yeah, certainly. So that Illinois assault weapons ban, AR-15 ban, magazine limit, and, obviously bans lots and lots of other guns besides the AR-15, but that's the main focus of most of these sorts of bans. That's now back in effect for the moment because the state case is now over. And the interesting twist to it, as you alluded to, is that they didn't make this decision on Second Amendment grounds or gun rights grounds. Instead, this case was focused on equal protection grounds. So as is usually the case with most of these kinds of bans that exist, these sales bans, there are exceptions for law enforcement, both active duty law enforcement and even retired law enforcement. And then there's also exceptions for people who owned the guns before the effective date of the sales ban.
The grandfather.
And grandfather clause, typical stuff that you'll see. Although not every proposal has that. Some of the more extreme ones get rid of all of that, and they're just kind of possession bans generally. But this one has your traditional grandfather clause and all that. And the case here focused on the idea that the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment and Illinois state equal protection powers would prevent this law from going into effect because it creates different categories of people who are subject to it. So the people who aren't given one of these exceptions don't have the same equal protection as people who are. So that was how this case went forward and what was litigated on. There was also some procedural stuff in Illinois. You're supposed to, there's certain time periods you're supposed to have the bills go through the legislature in. They can't, they're designed to keep bills from being sort of jammed through really quick. And the plaintiffs accused the lawmakers in Illinois of violating that as well. And ultimately the Supreme Court of Illinois decided that neither of those claims worked, that equal protection wasn't violated by this. And so now the law is back in effect, and they did not consider the Second Amendment claim that was added to this case by the plaintiffs. So they just don't bother even addressing whether or not these sorts of sales bans are foreclosed by the Second Amendment to the Constitution or by the Illinois state constitution.
I think it raises a couple of questions, but not the least of which is, so for example, federal law enforcement, retired federal law enforcement, we were issued, if you wanted to have one, or if you're on the special response team, you were issued an M4 rifle, which is an AR variant, which has the selector switch includes 3-round bursts, which is not legal for the average person. I just wonder, are they going to take this? Do we know if the plaintiffs are going to then regroup and try to refile this as more of a Second Amendment case and kind of abandon the equal protection aspect of it?
That's a good question, right? Because effectively what this does is it resets the whole state level legal claim. So if you want to make that Second Amendment claim, and the plaintiffs did try to do that in this Supreme Court case, this Illinois Supreme Court case, but the court said they didn't do it properly. They hadn't initially made the Second Amendment claims, and so they couldn't do it when they got to the Supreme Court level. And maybe that's, I'm not a lawyer in Illinois, so how valid this finding is, I don't know, but you could look at it as potentially strategic litigating on both the part of the Supreme Court justices. So, by the way, in Illinois, they elect their Supreme Court justices, and they're partisan. So they run as Democrats or Republicans, and there are currently 5 Democrats on the state Supreme Court and 2 Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can even have things like the governor, who's the defendant in this case, gave money to the campaigns of some of these justices. That's allowed in Illinois. That's how they do their Supreme Court. It's not, and they're not alone. There are other states where the Supreme Court justices are elected instead of appointed, and there can be partisan affiliations for them as well. So it's not completely out of the ordinary, but that's how it works in Illinois. So you can look at these judges as maybe even more explicitly political players than normal. But this ruling was actually 4-3 in this case. So one of the Democrats did flip to the no side. And you can look at that as perhaps they were trying to avoid the Second Amendment question at all, the gun rights question in this law, because if the Supreme Court of Illinois rules that the Second Amendment doesn't protect against these sorts of sales bans, that could be appealed to the United States Supreme Court directly. And so if they don't rule that, they don't rule on that at all, you're much less likely to get a case appealed up to the Supreme Court of the United States on those grounds. So sure. It sort of resets the whole thing. If you want to make the Second Amendment claims, you've got to go back and start at the beginning again. And so it kind of delays things, which is not an unheard of tactic in the legal world, right? If a judge on a lower court thinks that, well, I'd like to rule a certain way, but I think the court above me is going to knock that down, maybe they choose to take a less complete path and just rule on a different aspect and make the plaintiffs go back to the bottom. At the same time, you could also look at it the plaintiff side. Perhaps they didn't argue this properly because they didn't add this Second Amendment claim until later on, or maybe thought they'd had a better chance with the equal protection claims, which did flip one of the Democrats. So, there's a couple of interesting layers to this as far as strategic litigation goes. Interesting.
So I just wanted to read a quote from U.S. District Judge Stephen P. McGlynn, who had a decision involving this, a separate case, I believe. Or was it the same case?
So there's a federal case too.
Yes. Okay. I
right?
just wanted
there's the state case, which is what just got resolved
right
against the plaintiffs and for the state of Illinois. But there's also a simultaneous federal case against the same law on Second Amendment grounds.
Okay.
And that's where this judge you're about to read from, he ruled in a case on that. Go ahead and read that quote. Actually.
Yeah, I was going to say this should be carved somewhere in granite and put in public because this is one of the best quotes I've ever read about this topic. Quote, "Can the senseless crimes of a relative few be so despicable to justify the infringement of the constitutional rights of law-abiding individuals in hopes that such crimes will then abate or at least not be as horrific?" There's more to that quote than that, but that's absolutely gold. He crystallized it as far as I'm concerned.
And as you could probably tell from that quote, he ruled that this sales ban, this assault weapons ban, so-called assault weapons ban, violates the Second Amendment. And that's the ruling we have in the federal court. Now, this has been appealed, of course, by the Illinois government, and it's currently sitting at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the circuit that obviously covers Illinois and several other states. And they had oral arguments in that case back in June, so we're just waiting for a ruling to come down out of that court. That's the place to watch now. The state case has been resolved for now. Plaintiffs could go back and file that Second Amendment claim and start from the beginning there. Maybe they will. But the more immediate thing that's going to happen is the Seventh Circuit decision. And right now, that lower court judge that you just read from his opinion, his ruling has been stayed. So the law is in effect if you're in Illinois. You can't buy these guns at the moment. But that could change soon, depending on what the Seventh Circuit does. And then from there, you could get if depending on which way it goes, you could get an appeal to the full Seventh Circuit, because these start at a panel level, so you get 3 judges, and then that can be appealed to the higher level of the court, which is all the judges on that court, that appeals court, and then from there you go up to the Supreme Court. And of course, you can appeal right to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of ins and outs and intricacies with this stuff, but right now you want to wait and see what happens in that panel from the Seventh Circuit. That's the next big thing to see.
This is why we have you on, sir, to help explain to us and to the audience some of the intricacies of this stuff, because it is interesting stuff and it does have impact on everybody, not just people in Illinois. Precedent matters. So, folks, do me a favor. If you're lamenting the lack of down-the-middle, sane, sober reporting on the Second Amendment and all things gun-related, go over to thereload.com, and check it out. Consider getting a membership. Stephen and his staff, which hopefully will be growing, relies on the membership dues to fund their important work. I hope you have a wonderful week, sir. I will see you next week. And as always, you have the last word.
Absolutely.